The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everybody, welcome to the final unit of the Lunch and Learn series. I hope you've got tremendous amounts out of the series and have tried to apply all sorts of different strategies. Could I just make sure that I'm being heard? So just if you could type in over in the question box the word clear, that will help me know that I'm coming across loud and clear. Okay, so that would be great. Otherwise I'm talking to myself. Thanks, Darren. Okay, thanks, Graham. Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Michael. Okay, good. Welcome, everybody, and I'm looking forward to this topic, which might seem like a very dry topic, but I don't think you'll find it will be. I put a lot of thought into meetings, and I actually think that our whole world revolves around meetings. In fact, you could argue that what we're having here right now is a meeting, and as soon as you finish this meeting, you're on to a next meeting, and another meeting, and another meeting, and it never ends. So if that's the case, then it's probably very important for the leaders who run those meetings, which is either you or in the future it'll be you anyway, is to learn to run those as effectively and efficiently and as enjoyably as you possibly can. So I think that's really important because otherwise we're wasting enormous amounts of time. Meetings cost a lot of money. If you actually work it out, if you had 6 people in a room for an hour, we're actually talking about 6 people's hourly rates multiplied by 2 because of the opportunity costs that are lost. So we're talking 12 hours of time taken up in a 1-hour meeting with 6 participants. So you'd want to be able to say you've got something useful out of that in order to be effective. All right, so that's a bit of a preamble. Normal process, of course, by all means, fire questions, comments, observations, anything you like at any stage, and I'll stop the process and respond to that. So it's been a long journey. We've started at Module 1 and we looked at feedback, and then we looked at our influencing capabilities profile, and I hope you are still practicing these things. So all of these things should be building upon each other. Optimizing team performance was pretty much about having conversations, effective conversations with your team members and building up that rapport and trust in order to get the additional discretionary performance that you would be hoping to do. Unit 4, we were looking at different motivational theories, and at the end of the day, it all distilled down to 3 concepts: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Giving people a sense of autonomy, giving people a sense of development and mastery, and of course explaining to people what the reason or rationale for something was. We had a little bit of fun in the last unit, which is looking at understanding people and their personalities, and I had some great feedback from a couple of you that really enjoyed that session. By all means, you can use that diagnostic that you completed with your team. I think that's a great idea, and have a bit of a laugh, have a bit of fun with it. So no drama whatsoever. And of course, the principle of Unit 5, which was our last unit, was essentially to treat people how they want to be treated, which is the platinum rule rather than the golden rule. So if you're having personality clashes with people, it may well be that you're coming at it from a completely different perspective, and sometimes it's useful just to think about the other person and what they want out of the arrangement. And you may find that the personality profile that I sent you could be very helpful. So yeah, by all means, get your team involved, as I know some of you are thinking very seriously about doing. All right, so, and of course your homework was to try new approaches with the people that you lead, emphasising personality type. So I don't know whether you've got any interesting stories that you want to share. I know people might not feel comfortable sharing it in this forum, but I hope you've had some breakthroughs there, or at least thought differently about how people look at things. And remember, I used 4 animals because I found it really convenient. There's a lot of these behavioural differentiators in the marketplace, and a lot of them are very difficult to understand. You know, you've got the MBTI, which distills down into 4 letters. I just use 4 animals, the owls, peacocks, bulls and lambs, as a simple way of being able to work out who's who and to be able to treat them according to how they want to be treated. So I do hope you've had an opportunity to try that, because it's important to do that, and you know, that's why I'm suggesting that if you actually got other people in your team to complete that diagnostic, it could be a real eye-opener for them and for you and for others in the team in relation to how people like to be treated. And you can have a bit of a laugh about it too, which is always a good idea. So that was your homework. I hope you've had a good chance to absorb that. And it was really, as I said, based on the concept of the platinum rule, which is treat people how they want to be treated. Don't treat people how you want to be treated. What that means essentially is that what we need to do is just to flex our personality to be able to accommodate the needs of other people when we know that they have a particular personality trait. The golden rule is more a rule around respect and, you know, treating people how you want to be treated, which is about respect and so forth. The platinum rule is more around treating people how they want to be treated in terms of their personality. So that's the big difference there. Some people have asked me about the difference there. All right, so what are we going to be doing today in lunch? Well, we've got the context of meetings, so let's just actually understand the principles of meetings and how they fit in with our day. We should look at the structure of meetings. How do you structure your meetings? Some of the interpersonal skills that you need when you're leading a meeting. So this is you actually facilitating a meeting. And some ideas that I've got that I think you can implement immediately to enrich your meetings. So lots of practical stuff here for you today. All right, so I'm going to start from this premise, and that is being good at running productive meetings is one of the most critical and untapped skills of any leader. So I would argue that this is something that you should be working very hard at developing skills in this area. Now, you might say to me, well, you know, I attend a lot of different meetings and really they're not very good, so why should I make an effort? Well, because there's this word that starts with P called pride, and you make an effort to be the very best you can at running meetings. In fact, it's a great thing if people can actually say to you, or even behind your back, that you run a great meeting. I think that's a great compliment. All right, so make a commitment to be good at this. And for those of you, and I suspect there'll be a few of you who aren't in a position where you really do run meetings, let me assure you, you will be in that position at one point. So you can certainly take on board some of these concepts and apply them if and when that opportunity arises, and it will be more a when rather than an if. All right, so I think this is a core skill. Just as it's a core skill to get the very best out of people, I think it's a core skill also to run effective meetings. Because, look, think about it. How many, you take your week, how many hours this week have you spent in meetings? It might be worth have a look at your calendar and just work that out. You might be absolutely shocked. And that's not just the formal meetings. What about the corridor meetings? What about the impromptu meetings? So you add all that up and it's a significant chunk of your week. In fact, probably the most significant chunk of your week. So getting good at running them becomes really, really important for that reason. Now, here's something I'd like you to have a think about. Meetings themselves are not productive. I'll just repeat that. Meetings themselves are not productive. It's what happens or doesn't happen between the meetings that determines the effectiveness of the meeting. In other words, meetings are set up in order to clarify priorities, work out what's happening next, allocate responsibilities and so forth. So if you have, for example, a meeting every week, what goes on in between those meetings is critically important to the effectiveness of the meetings themselves. So it's important that we understand that the meetings themselves are not really the productive aspect. That is to orientate people's, direction, get priorities clear, work out what has to be done. That's what the nature of meetings is about. So it's really important that we understand that meetings, this is a good example. Like you may well enjoy this lunch and learn session today like the other 5. But the bottom line is this: unless you do something differently as a result of today's session in terms of running meetings, then it's kind of hasn't been a really successful lunch and learn, has it? Apart from perhaps being entertaining and insightful, it's actually what happens as a result of the meeting. So that's something I want you to have a think about. Now, if we really sit here and think, well, what are meetings for? What do they do? Well, I've categorized them as follows. And of course, some meetings overlap and do several of these things. Some meetings are dedicated to just one of these things, but let's have a look. Some meetings are there to inform. So this might be where you want to inform your team of a new project or a new client or a new way of doing business. So, it's an information sharing meeting, and those meetings are typically one way, where the person sharing the information will clearly do most of the talking because that's the nature of the meeting. We've got education meetings or meetings to educate. Now that's, you might say, well, is there a difference between information and education? Yes, absolutely. For example, the meeting you're in right now is an education meeting. You could argue, yes, I am informing you of some things, but at the end of the day, it's to help you build your capabilities up. So any training course, any workshop, any product demonstration type meeting, that would be an education meeting. All right, so we've got those meetings. Now, some of these meetings, of course, will be applicable to you and some won't. We've got a clarify meeting. This is a meeting where we clarify positions. So, for example, a minor crisis might have occurred, or we had a huge mix-up in terms of orders, or something perhaps might have gone wrong, and we decide to call a meeting because we want to clarify the situation. Or there is a massive rumour going around about cost cuts, and the rumour is just that, a rumour, so we want to organise a meeting to let people know that that's actually not the case, because if people think that, it's harmful as well as being incorrect. We've got an engaged meeting. Engaging meetings are where we want to engage people in a problem. So this is where we might be asking people for their feedback or their view or how they might resolve something that's related to their workplace. We're engaging people in a process of how we might move forward. We've got a solving collective problem meeting, which is not dissimilar, but it's about getting everyone's heads together because they're all intimately involved in the problem and working out how we might resolve it. We've got a review progress meeting, and lots of organisations have a work in progress meeting where once a week perhaps people get together and share the information of, for example, sales for the week, or orders taken for the week, or progress for the week, or whatever it might be. And then we've got making decisions meeting where we may sort of collectively do this as a team and work out some of the things that we might do to make decisions. Now, obviously, there's a lot of spillover between those categories, and I actually think as a principle, it's a good idea to work out what you're trying to do in a meeting. So if you're going to call a meeting, what is the purpose? Is it to inform? Is it to educate? Is it to engage? Is it to clarify? Is it to solve problems? Is it to review progress? Is it to make decisions? it's important for you to be able to identify what the purpose of that meeting is, and then perhaps to even articulate it at the meeting if people are a little bit puzzled about why they've been invited to come to this meeting. So that's the meetings can do all of those things. Now, I did allude to this at the outset in my introduction, but I'd like you to think of the cost of meetings. Meetings cost a lot of money. And of course, they're not in the balance sheet. I mean, if you picked up a balance sheet, you'd find that there'd be no line item saying meeting costs. But if there were, I can assure you it would be certainly noticed, because it would be a significant cost on doing business. Let me give you an example. If you think, and you might want to do this, and I strongly recommend you do this as a bit of your homework, think about your team for the moment and think about what the average income in your team is per hour. So, I'm sure everyone may not be on the same wage. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But what's the aggregate income? What is the aggregate hourly rate for your team members? So that would be working out what everyone's hourly rate is and multiply it by whatever it was, 5 or 6 or 7, whoever numbers in the team. So once I've got that, the next step is to say, well, how many meetings on average do my team members attend each week? Now, that's not hard to monitor. So you've probably got access to their calendars, or if you haven't, it's probably fairly easy to ask. So how many meetings in terms of hours during the week? Typically, how long do the meetings last, which is the next point, and how many in the team? And then what you do then is you then also, once you've worked out what that figure is, all right, so let's say, for example, I've attended, just pick a number, I've attended 10 meetings and they have been of 2 hours on average. So I've been at a meeting 20 hours a week, 20 hours during this week. So virtually half the average week I've spent in a meeting. And then whatever my hourly rate is, I multiply that by the number of, hours, which is 20 times the hourly rate. And let's say there's 6 of me, and then I'd multiply that by 6. And then, as that last line item says, because I'm in that meeting and not doing or attending to other things, I multiply that by 2, because that's the opportunity costs that are lost while I'm sitting in a meeting. In other words, I can't be doing something else necessarily while I'm sitting in a meeting. Now that, folks, is a significant amount of money. And let me give you some figures. Let's say that the average is $31.25 an hour. Let's say that we have 5 meetings a week, 1 a day. Let's say that each meeting lasts for 2 hours. So we actually have 10 hours a week in meetings. There are 6 people in my team, and we double the cost. We are talking about a figure of $195,000 per annum. That's what it would cost. That's what your team, the team meeting costs are, $195,000. That's just your team. So if you think about it, what would it be like if you were in an organisation with 1,000 people? What would the annual cost of having 1,000 people doing similar figures to what we're seeing there, which are fairly modest? We're talking $32.5 million in cost. Now, if you had $32.5 million in a line item called meeting costs, I think if you were a decent leader and you were scrutinising the budget, you would probably want to know whether we got $32.5 million worth of value from that activity, which of course is meetings. All right, so I'm just putting the case to you that it's really important to understand that we're talking about some serious drain or costs, and I'm not suggesting for a minute we shouldn't be meeting. What I am suggesting is that we should be meeting more effectively and more efficiently, and then these sorts of figures are actually not a problem because the meetings are very productive, or at least what happens out of the meetings is very productive. So any comments, questions, observations, folks, you can type them in your question box and I will deal with it as soon as I see it come up. So I just wanted to really just make it very clear that we're talking about some serious costs. Now, a couple of things that I think, let's move into some of the things that I think you should do or not do. I personally think that the idea of rotating the chair is not a good idea. Now, I know it was quite fashionable several years ago, and the whole principle was that we get everybody engaged in the meeting and so forth. But some people absolutely dread chairing the meeting. Not only that, some people are really, really bad at it. So by rotating the chair and trading off in terms of engagement, you're actually not probably doing yourself much good. I think that's your job. If you're the leader of your team, you should be chairing the meetings. Not only that, I think everyone in your team probably expects that you would be doing that as well. So I don't think it's a good idea to rotate the chair. It's a skill that you need to develop, and it's not something that someone can just walk in and pick up and go for it. And I think you'll find that the meetings themselves will not be as they just won't be as good if you're rotating the chair. So take the response. If you've been doing that, I'm happy to hear some feedback on this. But if you've been doing that, I'd suggest you review that and think about it differently, because I don't think it works that well. And, you know, I know the law of averages, we've got a lot of people in this Lunch and Learn series today. It might be very likely that many of you do rotate the chair. But, you know, does it really engage people? Well, does the person who's chairing the meeting, are they more engaged? They're, you know, I guess they are. Does that mean everybody else is more engaged? Not necessarily. And so it's a big ask for, I think, a minimal return. So that's one thing I strongly recommend that you don't do. Now, what I strongly recommend that you do is, if you think about what happens in meetings, there's normally two aspects to it. There's reporting and then there's discussion. And I think that we spend too much time reporting and not enough time discussing. What do I mean by that? Well, everyone, you know, comes to the meeting, and through the principle of accountability, they'll share where they're up to, and this has happened and that's happened. Now, you know, a lot of that is very relevant because other people need to know what's going on, and obviously you do want to hold people accountable. But please don't get into a situation where you have 80% of your meeting is reporting and 20% is discussion, because that's not going to be a good meeting. What you want to aim for, if possible, is a 50-50 arrangement. 50% reporting. Now, if you're aiming for 50% reporting, then that means that you may have to look at the way people report. You may have to ask people to be very specific about the certain things that you want reports on, and not to just waffle on about a whole range of other things. So cutting back the reporting to make way or room for discussion, I think, is a very useful way forward. Now, what do you discuss in the meetings? Well, there's a heap of things you can discuss. You can talk about a critical incident that occurred. You can do a team values charter. You can talk about you know, the culture of your team. You can talk about a situation and how you can improve things in your team. I think it's really important for you as a leader to think, well, what can we discuss in the team meeting? Because the more discussion you have in a team meeting, the more engaged you will have team members, and more importantly, the more they walk out of there feeling as if it's been worthwhile because they've been engaged in a conversation. So go for 50-50 wherever possible, and try not to let the reporting overwhelm the meeting. And that happens all the time. And I think that it's quite sad when it occurs like that. Now, if you're looking at the discussion part of a meeting, one of the things I strongly recommend that you do is to use critical incidents. So use examples that have occurred. Say, for example, there's been a really excellent piece of client feedback or customer feedback. You've had some great feedback. Well, how about we use that? How about you use that and just say, look, this is great. I'm keen to know why they're so happy and what we might be able to do to duplicate that more so across the organisation or across the team. So what you do is you hear ideas and ways and means of being able to actually implement some of those really positive things moving forward. Because if you don't capture that critical incident at the time, what will happen is you'll forget about it. And then if you brought it up in 6 to 12 months' time, people will have forgotten the details and not appreciate what you're trying to do. So, and of course, if something's really gone badly, and inevitably it will, we're all humans and we all make mistakes, then you can also use that as a critical incident to talk about lessons learned. But set some ground rules up, of course, at the beginning of that, as in, this is not a finger pointing exercise. This is not an exercise of blame. What we're attempting to do here is to look for ways and means that this will not occur again. Right? Now that's going to be a great meeting because you're going to start looking at ways and means of doing things differently. How can that not work well for you? All right, now meetings are a great place for clarifying roles. Now, normally when people sit around a table at a meeting, the assumption is that everybody in the room will know intimately what everyone else does. Big mistake. We need to create some role clarity so that, unless you've got someone, you may well have 6 people that all do the same job. That's slightly different, but I'd suspect the law of averages is that you probably have people who do slightly different jobs. So how about we use the meetings to clarify roles? How do you do that? Well, you get each person in the team for, and I call, when I'm running these meetings, I call it a boiled egg. The reason I call it a boiled egg is it's only 3 minutes. And I just say each person has got 3 minutes to be able to explain their key priorities in their role and to explain some of the challenges of meeting those key priorities in 3 minutes. Now, you don't have everybody doing that at once, but each meeting you will give someone an opportunity to share their boiled egg. So what they do is they share what their key priorities are and what their challenges are. For 3 minutes invested, I think that's worthwhile. And you will find that people will pick up on a lot of interesting information. It also forces each individual to think more carefully about their role. They have to come to the meeting prepared. They have to think, well, what are my number one priorities? What are my challenges? So it forces people to do a little bit of navel gazing so that by the time they come to the meeting and share this with other people, they've actually thought this through carefully. So there's another thing that you might find very useful. So that's another discussion piece. So this is something where you could get someone to give that 3 minute, and 3 minutes is enough. You don't want people to go on and on and on about their job description. 3 minutes on my key priorities and my challenges, and then you open up a discussion about that. And I think it'd be easy to do, and I think it'd be far more productive than it would be just having a mindless reporting process where people are just tuning out regularly. I still think there's a place for reporting, but I think we've got to be smart about what we're reporting on, and we've got to be really, we've got to cut that back so we can find the opportunity to engage with the team. Because you've got your whole team in the room. The real opportunity there is to engage in a conversation, in a discussion. So let's be clear that that's what we really should be doing in meetings, notwithstanding the cost of getting everybody in the same room. Now, I know not all of you are in this position, although even in the indoor office environment you could do this, but I think that there's great virtue in standing meetings. Now, you can certainly do this in a production area, those of you who are working in production areas, but certainly, even in the office, you can do this as a stand-up, provided, of course, you've got the right place to do this. But the advantage of a stand-up meeting is that really it will go a lot shorter than a normal meeting because everyone's standing up. And so therefore, because people are standing up, they're a little bit more alert, one. Two, they're a little bit briefer. It's great. So if you were, for example, at the beginning of a shift, you wanted to do a quick shift changeover and you wanted to find out what some of the problems were on the previous shift so that the new shift, when they came on board, were aware of that and could accommodate some of those issues, well, a standing meeting would be ideal. It would be a wonderful way to start the transition between one shift and another. So, the standing meeting could be impromptu as well as a set meeting once a week. But just a thought, I don't know whether that's applicable for all of you, but you may want to consider standing meetings. I think, when we're sitting in a chair, we're comfortable, we're staring out the window, nobody really, we don't at least think they notice us, and there we go. So, standing meetings could be very useful. Questions, comments, observations, guys, just type them in the question box. Happy to take those. You're very quiet this morning, that's for sure, or should I say this afternoon. It's 12 o'clock after 12 here in Brisbane. Now, let's talk about agendas. I think if it's worth meeting, it's worth planning. Now, of course, there are impromptu meetings and of course there are still agendas. It's just that they're perhaps not written down. But I think when you're having a regular meeting with your team, you, out of sheer respect for the team and to show that you've given it some thought, you should have an agenda. Now, agendas, let me say a few things about agendas. It sounds very formal, but I think if people at least know that there are 6 things that we're covering and here's the order that we're going to cover them and so forth, that can add some clarity to the meeting. So let me talk about a few principles around agendas. I think that one of the ways of controlling discussion in a meeting is to have your items listed and to put them in order of priority in terms of which is the most important. So the first item on your agenda should be your most important. Why? Because it's going to be discussed. If your most important item is number 5 or 6 on the agenda in an hourly meeting, it's highly likely that you may miss it, or you may not give it the full treatment it deserves. So what's the number 1 item that needs to be discussed, the second most important, the third most important, and so forth? After each item, I strongly recommend that you put a number. And so you put bracket, and then a number, and then a close of bracket. And what that number dictates is how long you intend to spend discussing that issue. So if someone's long-winded in your meeting and they won't shut up, you can actually say to them, look, we've only got 15 minutes to discuss this. Can you be really brief, please, and get to the point? Now, you can do that with some degree of authority when you've got a number next to the agenda item. So there's nothing wrong with doing that. In fact, I think there's a lot right with doing that, and it gives you a tremendous amount of kudos when you're running that meeting. Okay, now, another thing I'd suggest you do is that you finish on time. Why? Because everyone's busy and it's courteous. So if you have an hour's a good time for a meeting, then you finish on the hour. And anything that's left over on that agenda should be taken up at the next meeting, because people have got things to do and places to go to and so forth, and so do you. So it's sloppy when you go over time, so try to keep it to time. And another little tip that might be quite useful is start your meeting at odd times. Instead of starting a meeting at 10 o'clock, maybe I should have done this with lunch and learn, now that I think about it, start your meeting at, say, 10:10, because then people, ironically, will be certainly more likely to turn up on time. Now, the other thing I'd say about this business of people turning up on time, insist on it. It's important. You'll notice I start my Lunch and Learn series right on the bell, and the reason for that is that I have to respect your time, and you've got other things to do besides listen to me. So start on time, and you might say, well, yeah, but not everybody's here. Well, let me tell you, if you wait for them to arrive before you start, you are actually rewarding them for being late. In other words, if they rock in at, 10 past 10 and you say, right, now we can get started, then you've given them a sense of importance because you've actually said, well, we can't meet without you. And all it's done is reinforce the idea that being late is actually a good thing. So just start, even if there's only one person in the room. Sooner or later, people will get the idea really quickly that being on time is critically important, because it'll add a degree of discomfort to people when they can see that they've walked in on a meeting that's already started. So start on time is really important. Now, one of the things I strongly recommend that you do is to summarise at the end of the meeting. Now, I'm not talking about reading out minutes or things like that, okay? I actually think it's about some of the key points that have come out of the meeting, and you can delegate this to someone else. I see this done very rarely, and it surprises me. So what you do is you find someone in your team that's got a good skill set around this, and there will be someone that's very clever at being able to put these things together, and you ask them to just keep an ear out during the meeting and mention to them that you will defer to them at the end of the meeting. And what you want them to do is just to tell you what the key points were that came out of the meeting. Now, that does a couple of very interesting things. One is it forces them to listen more closely than perhaps they would normally. Two, it rewards them because it's a strength that they have. And three, the last thing that people remember in the meeting is some kind of a key summary of the points. Only takes 2 minutes, makes a big difference. So why not do something interesting and different like that? Because at the end of the day, at the end of the meeting, you want people to be clear about what it is that has transpired during that meeting. Okay, now I just want to make the point about this little chart in front of you, which is fairly simple, but I just want to make the point that the longer the meeting goes, the less effective the meeting is. So the first rule of thumb is that we should be aiming for 1 hour meetings. Now you might say, well, why 1 hour? Well, you can get a lot of stuff done in an hour if you do it properly, just as we're doing today. But, and if it's worth meeting it, probably an hour is a good time. But if you start going beyond an hour, and let's face it, there are lots of meetings that do go on beyond an hour, and some of them have to go on beyond an hour. The truth of the matter is the people's effectiveness in meetings wanes. So does yours, the person chairing or running the meeting. And as you can see on the chart, when you're making decisions, the best time to collectively make decisions in meetings in the early part of the meeting. And as you move on, people will have a tendency to defer decisions. People will have a tendency not to contribute to decisions. People will have a tendency to be not focused on decisions the longer the meeting goes. So if you put in your agenda the number one thing that needs to be discussed, number two, number three, so that could be also on the basis of decisions that have to be made. And so you'll find the energy level will be a lot more conducive early on in a meeting to making serious decisions. So just a thought, don't leave critical decisions to the end of the meeting, because you'll find that that will take longer than it needs to. People will be giving it less attention than you perhaps would like them to do. So that's important. Now, the other thing I'd say to you is that when you're setting up and I mean, let's face it, most of us meet around a table when we have a meeting, but just have a think about the different formats of meetings, because it's quite interesting. It has a huge impact on the effectiveness of a meeting, and it's just important to keep these in the back of your mind as we go through. So starting at the top and going clockwise, you've got the theatre style of the meeting. Now, the theatre style is where everyone's lined up in rows, and you've got out the front maybe some head people, and this is like a typical shareholder meeting, for example. And these are information conveying meetings. This is very much where the people at the top four on the table there at the top are each going to give a presentation on a topic. So it's very much an information sharing meeting, and everybody's just sitting there taking and absorbing the information. Now, those meetings are great for information sharing, but they're not so good for, for engagement, of course. The second setup is where the difference is that you've got a classroom style where you've actually got you've got tables in the room. So this is ideal in an education environment where you've got an expert talking about a particular topic, and people, of course, have got a table that they can, put their laptop on, or their writing pad or whatever it is, and they can record information from that meeting. So that can be quite effective. But again, it's not very good and conducive for collaboration and communication between the people in the room. Then you've got the U shape, and of course a lot of workshops and training programs are run like that. And this is the advantage of the U shape compared with the classroom, is that the people are, or a lot of them are essentially facing each other. So it is more conducive to getting more discussions going in the team. So that can be very effective when you want to get discussion happening in your team. Then you've got the cabaret style. Now, the cabaret style is one of the ones that I favour when I'm running workshops, because I can then group people around a table, and so I can break out into small groups and get those groups to report back on their findings, and this can be very effective for that reason. So I use that quite a lot. It also adds a degree of informality, which I enjoy in a meeting. You don't want to be too formal if you're wanting people to contribute to conversation. The banquet style is a bit more formal, and that's probably likely to be in a dinner type arrangement where you've got a guest speaker and you've got some dignitaries at the top table. A wedding's another good example of where it would be set up in a banquet style. And then, of course, you've got the conference style, which is people sitting around a conference table, which is very typical of, say, a board or a senior executive team. Most people are facing each other so that they can discuss various issues, and normally the person chairing the meeting is sitting at the top of the table. So, you're probably likely to be using the conference style, but just be aware that there are different formats and ways that you can set up the table or the chairs, and they will have different impacts on your meeting. So it's just important to keep that in the back of your mind as we launch into this topic. Now, one of the things that I strongly recommend that you do in your weekly or fortnightly meeting is to invite people to come to the meeting to share insights. Now, I'm not talking about, a sort of a celebrity speaker or something. I'm talking about people who, the best place to start is the people in your team yourself. So what are the skills, knowledge and capabilities that your team members have got that might be worth conveying to the rest of the team? That's a good place to start. Could you give them 5 minutes each meeting to talk about something, some aspect of what they do in their work? Is there a particular conference or project that you would like them to, let people know about, and some of the lessons learned perhaps? And of course, you can go to the wider organisation and think about other people in other teams that you might want to invite to the meeting, because it's quite flattering to invite someone to a meeting, and ask them if they could update your team on X or Y. So maybe there's new legislation. You'd like someone to come in and share with your team what the latest findings are. Invite someone in to do that. It's a great opportunity, and it'll add some spice to the meeting as well. It doesn't have to take up the whole meeting, but it could be, say, 10 minutes, and it could be, and then from there it could generate a really meaningful discussion with your team. So that can be very powerful as well. So yeah, use guest speakers, and why not? It's a good thing to do. Of course, if you've got people in stakeholders or other people, I can remember one meeting I ran many years ago where we actually invited some customers in to talk about their experience of dealing with us. Boy, was that powerful, because these customers, I told them not to pull any punches. Come in and tell us exactly how it is. What do you like? What do you dislike? What will we do differently? And it was a very good meeting. And then we had about a 40-minute discussion after about some of the things that we as a team would commit to as a result of that presentation, because these people had instant credibility. They were on the receiving end of what we did. So that worked really well. So think about that. How could you inject a guest speaker into the meeting to make it a little bit more interesting and insightful? Now, a couple of things that I think you should do as the person running the meetings that will help you a lot. You should be using paraphrasing, and I know this is communication 101, but nevertheless, very few of us are very good at this. Paraphrasing is where you summarize in your own words what you have heard one of the people around your table in the meeting has said. All right, so you might say, so in other words, your concern here is that we don't have enough people in order to take on this new project. Now, they might have spent 5 minutes telling you that, but that's in essence what their key point is. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, there's 3 good reasons, actually. It checks to make sure that you do have an understanding of what their key point is, and that's important, because if you're running the meeting, you need to know what they're trying to say, and some people aren't terribly articulate. So have a go at trying to summarize what it is or paraphrase what it is that they're trying to say. That's one good reason. Another good reason, of course, is that it lets the speaker know that you've heard them, and that's always affirming. So if the other person knows that you have been listening to them, then that's a good place to be. They, in turn, may well be interested in listening to you. And from the point of view of running meetings, if you summarize via paraphrasing what someone said, you are now in a position where you can move the conversation or the meeting on to the next item. So it's a kind of way of punctuating where people are at. Or, for example, someone said something and you say, so in other words, what you're saying is blah, blah, blah. All right, thank you. I've got that. Right, someone else, please. And then you ask somebody else for their feedback. All right, so that can work really well. And I should say to you that those are the quiet, naturally quiet ones in the meeting. You may have to just give them a hand. And what I mean by that is actually ask them if there's anything that they would like to add to the conversation. This is very effective. So, you've got Fred or Mary sitting in the corner. They haven't said anything. They normally don't say anything in meetings. And you actually turn to Fred and you say, Fred, is there anything you want to add to what's already been said? Now, that's very powerful because it does 2 things. Certainly, it puts Fred on notice that we do value you. It also lets everybody else in the room know that everybody's expected to contribute, and maybe I need to speak, because if I don't, then, my boss may just point out or ask me to say something. So it does a lot of good, and I think you shouldn't be shy of doing that. Getting people, this is really what the next topic is about, getting people involved in meetings. So the objective is that you should try to give everyone an opportunity in a meeting to say something. Now, of course, the natural tendency will be the 20-80 rule. 20% of the people will do 80% of the talking, and equally 80% of the people will only do 20% of the talking. But I do want you to try to get everyone involved. The idea is that no one should just sit there passively. And I understand that sometimes people don't want to say anything unless they've got something really valuable to say, and that's how it should be. But by the same token, if you're running meetings, you should ask people if there's anything they'd like to add. It's courtesy, and it's also clever, because after a while they'll get to understand that you actually expect them to say something in the meeting and not just sit there quietly, because that's part of what being in a meeting's all about, of course, is to contribute. So if you do it sensitively and you're giving people an option, so if you say to someone, John, there's nothing, is there anything you want to add to what's already been said? Now, John has every right to say, no, I'm all good. Well, that's fine. John's off the hook, in a sense. So John doesn't have to contribute just for the sake of it. But you'd be surprised when you use that strategy how often the Johns or the Marys of the world will actually say something. It's been on the tip of their tongue, but they just haven't brought themselves to say it. Because a lot of people are very intimidated by meetings, and they won't say things that they really think. And your job is to run a relaxed, efficient meeting so that everyone feels comfortable to contribute in their own way. That's essentially what you're there to do. All right? So, one of the things that you might like to try, and is a team values charter, which is a great way to get a conversation going in your team. All right, so I may have mentioned this earlier on in the Lunch and Learn, but it's a great way of actually developing a set of values about how the team would like to operate within themselves. And it's simply based on a number of key questions. So what's one value that's important when we meet? So everybody has a go at writing this down. So you actually get people to physically write this down. It's a session that everyone writes down. So I might write down, I want to feel respected. What does it mean? Well, respect to me means that I'm listened to when I have a point of view, particularly when I have a point of view that's not necessarily popular. Right? So I write that down. Why is it important? Well, it's important because I want to feel part of this team. What behaviours would demonstrate that value? Well, if people actually bite their tongue until it bleeds and let me finish what I'm saying, I'm happy. And what behaviours would violate it? Well, obviously be people talking over the top. So you actually get people to write that down. And then what you do, and you do it as well, by the way, because you must start by setting the example, and then you start by reading out your value, what it means, why it's important to you, what behaviours would be consistent with it, and what behaviours would be inconsistent with it. And then you move around the table. You'll find it will be one of your best meetings, because you are now putting things on the table. You are valuing where people are at and what they expect in the meeting. You are creating a charter. And the reason why it works so well is that everybody's contributing to that charter. It's not just something that's been imposed upon the team from above, okay, because people don't own it. Whereas with a team values charter, they actually own it, and that's the critically important thing. So I would strongly recommend you do that. If you'd like some more advice on how you might do that, send me an email and I'll certainly explain that to you. But you could do a lot worse than develop a team values charter. Now, one of the most powerful things that you can do in a meeting to begin with is to go round the table and talk about win for the week. Now, what that means is very simply that you start your meeting off on a positive spiral, a positive upward spiral. So I come into the meeting and I talk about my win for the week. And I don't have to give a great speech about it. I just literally could be 15 seconds. This is my win for the week. And then we go round the table. Now, the first time you do this, of course, everyone's going to give you a very strange look because they're not used to it. But why shouldn't we start talking about wins for the week? Why? I mean, they're obviously there have been wins for the week, so why don't we get in and talk about them? Why do we have to go straight for the jugular and talk about the negativity? We're going to do that anyway, aren't we? So why don't we start off talking about a win? So we go around the table. We ask each person to contribute a win for the week, and you'll find that that works really, really well. But as I said, there'll be people that'll sit there in a very strange way and can't think of anything, which is kind of sad, isn't it? That people can't think of anything positive that happened in the whole week. Must have been a hell of a week. So you start, and you'll find that after the second or the third meeting, that everybody will be completely engaged in Win for the Week. Not only that, they will come to the meeting ready, which is actually what you want. Now, the good news is when you get some of these things that come up in the meeting, you can use them as a very, very useful tool to say, that's fantastic. How could we all do that? Or what do we all need to do to make that happen in our own environments? So, and not only that, it helps you, being the leader, to understand what's important to people, to be aware of what's going on. So you will hear things in the room that you didn't know were occurring for the week, which is great. Now, when you know it's working really well is when you have actually, people actually coming to work talking about things in their personal life. My son won a, medal at soccer, or, my father hit a hole in one on the weekend, or, all that sort of stuff. And you'll hear it. And it's good because it actually rounds out what people are about. So I'd like you to try Win for the Week. Look, it takes 5 minutes to go around the table. It'll make all the difference. And imagine if every team in your organisation had a win for the week and to start their meeting. I can assure you morale would go up, everything would improve. And it's not Pollyanna, because there are wins, and why aren't we talking about them? And why shouldn't we talk about them? So that might be some homework for you. Your next meeting, which may be Monday, whatever it is, I'm going to start Win for the Week. And even if you get funny looks, go for it. You'll be surprised. I remember doing this with in a police service, and we had all these tough detectives sitting around the table. And one of them, when we got to them, said, Win for the week? Well, I've got 4 years, 3 months, and 2 days before I retire. Not exactly what I was after, but after a while, of course, he fell into line once he realised that we were serious about this Win for the week, and came with a few more constructive things, which is great. So that's a good thing to do. Someone said to me, in 40 years in this organisation, I've never ever been involved in something like that, which I found really interesting. So your homework, people, is to implement some new approaches to your meetings. Don't care what it is, but I want you to try something different. I want you to have a crack at doing something different. Why? Because if you just tinker at the edges and try something, you'll improve the quality of your meetings. And if you're not running meetings, just put them in your memory bank and start thinking about ways of doing that. So have we got any questions, folks? We've got a very quiet group. You're all very quiet today. Maybe I'm either making a hell of a lot of sense or not much at all, but either way, you're being very quiet, so trying to get you involved is not that easy. Maybe I haven't even given you a chance to catch your breath. I don't know. Hopefully it's got through to you and you're happy with what you're hearing. But that's your homework. So I want you to have a real good go at that and do something a little bit differently, and enjoy it and have some fun with it. Now, we've gone through some good sessions with what we've done, and I just wanted to let you know that I've got another Lunch and Learn coming up next week. So if there's people in your organisation who you would like to enrol in that program, you'll notice slightly different. We can get you enrolled in that. So happy to do that, and I just want to thank all of you very much for the privilege, and it is a privilege, for me to be allowed to come into your life for these 6 lunch and learn sessions, and I really hope that you've taken something away and you've applied it and you've got good value for your money, because that's what this is all about. So thank you, and I wish you all the best. And I realise, of course, that we will probably not meet again, but I've really enjoyed working with you. And thank you for those that have sent me emails. Thank you for those that have kept me involved, told me what's going on in your team. And there's been quite a few of you, and that's been really great. So thanks, guys, and I wish you all the very best. Have a wonderful weekend. We've just got a comment here, a couple of comments actually. Oh, thank you, guys. That's very kind of you. Jackie, it's been great, Tim. Much appreciated. Love your new bookcase on LinkedIn. Oh, wow. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Tim. For me, the most beneficial unit. Oh, okay. Thanks, Michael. Thoroughly enjoyed the series. Appreciate it. Thanks for the series, another Michael. And Tim says, thanks, Tim. It's been great. Well, thanks, guys. That's very kind of you. It's always reassuring to to know that you've hit the mark. So anyway, thank you, guys. And I wish you all the very best. Have a wonderful weekend, and hopefully we'll meet up sometime in the future. Thank you and goodbye. And thanks, Darren. Great session. You the man. Thanks, Darren. See you. Bye.